Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we have David Steinman with us. He has been a leader in the movement to reduce toxins for over 30 years. He is dedicated to empowering consumers by exposing the dangerous ingredients found in everyday products, connecting the dots between beauty, food, and other goods and their impact on children's development, reproductive health, cancer, and more. As director of the Chemical Toxin Working Group, he advocates for safer choices and the removal of toxins from products, even testifying before Congress. Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Carolyn. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about, parabens and phthalates and pesticides and cancer and all sorts of things. But before we delve into all of that, will you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, let me say this. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and fished all my life. And unbeknown to me, I really fished every weekend. I worked on fishing boats even. 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a chemical plant called Montrose manufacturing DDT in South Central Los Angeles. And they dumped several thousand tons of DDT waste sludge into the Santa Monica Bay where I fished. So I became poisoned, and I found out I became poisoned because later when I was an investigative journalist, I actually did a study where a team of, including myself and other scientists, measured the blood levels of DDT, a pesticide, and PCBs, an industrial chemical, in the blood of men and women eating fish from the locally caught fish from the Santa Monica Bay. They had very high levels of both chemicals. I happened to test myself too, knowing that I had grown up fishing, and I had very high levels too. I got lucky in that I found out, and as soon as I found out, I understood the connection. I knew the consequences. I had seen people actually during the study with cancer and hypertension induced by these chemicals. Their levels were so high. So I knew the consequences. I'd seen them. So I changed. And because I changed and I testified as a key witness at a congressional hearing, the expert witness, the Bay became a Superfund site. A lot of people got mad at me. The sanitation department in LA County got mad at me. The sport fishermen and women got mad at me because I was telling this ugly truth. And they kept saying, well, you should look at the rest of the food supply. What about our hamburgers and our lettuce? And they were right. I should have looked at the rest of the food supply, and I did. And I wrote Diet for a Poisoned Planet. And I've been doing this work ever since.
Wow. Okay, so were your health concerns with the DDT or the health issues you had, I should say, some of those you mentioned, or how did you know you actually had the poisoning?
So here's something really interesting. I realized the benefits of not having so much DDT in me after I got rid of it. And I did it scientifically. I got my blood counts done during that study, and I did a detox using low heat sauna, some nutritional supplements, running an exercise to mobilize the DDT and PCBs out of my fat tissues into my bloodstream, then excrete it. We actually measured the DDT levels before and after my detox, and also in my perspiration. Also, we did an IQ test, and my IQ went up by about 6 or 7 points after the detox. So that's when I began to say, oh, you know what? Life can be much better when you detox and you take care of these things. That's why lately I've been saying, buy the ticket, take the trip. Because people don't know what's on the other side when they begin making all these shifts in their diet and they stop their exposures because they've been exposed all their life. But once they stop, all of a sudden they say, you know what? This is kind of closer to the promised land of health.
Yeah, for sure. They don't know what they're missing out on. They don't realize that their normal is maybe bad. They don't realize that it could be so much better.
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about pesticides. So maybe we just start with pesticides. Is DDT still a concern today for people, or is it not necessarily in our food anymore?
I wrote Raising Healthy Kids, Protecting Your Children from Hidden Chemical Toxins. It's my new book. And I wrote it because the old-time chemicals like DDT can still be a risk, but they've been replaced by newer chemicals which also pose risks. DDT is still found in some foods like apples and strawberries, and that's because it's allowed to be used in another legal pesticide called dicophol, which is sprayed on our crops still. So it can be a concern. I also point out in my book that if you can't go organic, which reduces your exposure to DDT, you can buy the least fatty foods. Like, I like whole milk, for example. I have nothing against organic whole milk, but I think if you're trying to reduce your exposure to chemical toxins, which is important, non-fat milk is better because the DDT is found in the fatty portions of dairy foods. So DDT is still around, and all of its cousins like heptachlor, benzene hexachloride are still around. Dieldrin, PCBs, which are another chlorinated hydrocarbon, are still around. Dicophol is still around. So all these chemicals rear their head still, even 50 years after they were banned, so-called banned in the United States.
So interesting. So are the ones that are more of a concern today, like glyphosate?
So glyphosate is also known as Roundup. And this is just an example of a chemical that's completely out of control because it's showing up everywhere in all sorts of foods, in cereals, and just all sorts of different foods. And it's difficult to avoid because it seems to be spread by drifting. It needs to be phased out and banned. Organic foods will help you to avoid glyphosate. And that's not saying that the organic foods are perfect, because they're not. But I've looked at thousands of monitoring reports actually for organic foods in the course of writing my new book, Raising Healthy Kids. And organic foods, by what I've seen and also by the published peer-reviewed studies, are so much healthier and lower toxin. We should all not be being exposed to glyphosate. And one way to do that is just to go with the big O, organic. It will help. It's a big marker for healthier foods.
Well, I know it's a big money maker, though, glyphosate. And so other countries have banned it, but I don't know if our country will ever ban it.
Oh, I think we have chemical insanity in this country.
We have more pesticides than most of the other countries out there.
Carolyn, I mean, it's like, who are the adults in America who are taking care of these issues? I don't really see the adults in Congress. And just as an example, glyphosate should be banned. Chlorpyrifos was finally banned after, a half a century of exposure. The forever chemicals, which are showing up in people's drinking water, there's like 6,000 different versions of them now. EPA regulates a handful, bans none, even though we know they're robbing our kids of their future. Should it be banned? Yeah, it should be.
Well, do you think they'll ever get banned, or money is just the controlling factor of it all?
I'm not a nihilist. I really believe in public service, and I try to do my duty, but government often falls short. EPA often bows into industry pressure, and it's Congress who should be acting, for example, to set up a new way of regulating all these chemicals. Like, Carolyn, we do it piecemeal. We say, okay, we'll go after glyphosate. But what about the 6,000 forever chemicals? Are you going to regulate those 6,000 chemicals, one chemical structure by another? Maybe it's time to start looking at zero tolerance and regulating by category, like, do these chemicals cause cancer? Do they do any of them? Then they can't be used anymore. They need to be phased out. Reproductive harm, then they need to be phased out. Instead, what we do is we allow many of these chemicals to be put on the market without any safety testing whatsoever. And then we can't regulate them. This has happened in our cosmetic industry with phthalates, for example. And with pesticides, which the EPA regulates, they do it one chemical at a time. But we need new legislation in Congress that says chemicals need to be regulated by category, not by piecemeal. And it would make then all the PFAS chemicals, all these forever chemicals, would be phased out quite quickly. And industry would be stimulated because we are very technologically advanced. to find safer alternatives. The reason why they don't find the safer alternatives is because there's no stick. So you're asking me, will they be phased out? I see EPA, sometimes with a stick and a lot of times, without a stick. I'll give you an example. Recently, there's a neoprene plant in Reserve, Louisiana, and the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality, it's called DANCA, and it's right next to a school where the nonprofit group for which I'm chief officer supplies air filters, and the kids are being exposed to chloroprene there, which is a carcinogen.
Oh, wow.
So the state fined them $480,000. And I know, because I work in legal advocacy here in California, that's chump change.
Right.
That's not even a day's worth of profit.
Wow.
And they're going to keep on polluting. And yet to the average consumer who reads that, $480,000 sounds like, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. It's not, because this is DuPont Danka. It's one of the big multinational, this company happens to be owned by a company in Tokyo in Japan. They're really wealthy. $480,000 is okay. Let's get the day-to-day checking out.
That was just a little slap on the hand. They needed millions and millions of dollars of a fine.
Well, the irony is, you're asking about, will it be banned? The school has been there a lot longer than the plant. How about the plant just coming into regulations which are already lenient, already meeting those? And EPA has sued them, but it's also backed down on enforcement. Right now, fighting between the states and federal government is like the Reconstruction back in the 1870s. And with the Supreme Court the way it is, federal agencies are very reluctant to push things to the limit because they have a very unfriendly court now, and they're really afraid to set more precedent. So, with glyphosate, I think we have to be the adults in the room and do everything we can to avoid it. Just going all the way back to glyphosate. Because, I don't think government's going to ban it. I don't think they will. I think it should be banned, and I don't think they will.
Yeah, I tell my listeners all the time we need to vote with our dollars, and then those companies will provide more and more for us. So if we would vote with our dollars for organic produce and organic products, then they're going to provide more and more of that for us.
It's such a win-win situation. When you buy organics, I write about in Raising Healthy Kids, there's a town in California called Salinas, and it's called the salad bowl of America because so much lettuce is produced there, as well as strawberries and, other fruits and vegetables. All the schools are carved out of the farm fields. And when I used to go there as a reporter earlier, a few years ago, the schools were all surrounded by fields sprayed with these organophosphate chemicals we talked about, like diazinon, chlorpyrifos, acephate, and all these chemicals. And the kids were being exposed there at these schools. When I returned during the pandemic to write my book, the schools were all surrounded by organic strawberry and lettuce fields.
Oh, wow.
And I called one of the teachers, and the teacher told me, he said, well, David, that's because of consumers like you who kept buying all those organic strawberries and all that organic lettuce. You increased the demand so that now our children are much safer here too. And I
I love that.
Yeah, it was like a little real life miracle for me because I kept buying those strawberries. They were expensive back then, more so than today.
Yeah.
And people would say, but why are you spending so much on organic foods? Don't you know there's no difference? And I saw the difference I made with those schools. So it was kind of like a miracle.
Yeah, that's a neat story. Okay, I do want to ask you, though, about one other pesticide. And I've heard lately things about atrazine. And so what is that one, or where do we find it, and why is that not a good one?
Oh, wow, Carolyn, that's dear to my heart. I'm working on atrazine. And I'll tell you something, I'm going to meet with with a congressional representative following the election from the South, where there are sugarcane plantation after sugarcane plantation along the river, the Mississippi River. All those plantations use atrazine. And you know what ends up in the drinking water of the parishes along the river?
Atrazine, I bet.
And it's not only a carcinogen, it's also an endocrine disruptor. As people seem to be commenting on, Why is America suffering such a high infertility rate? It's because we're being exposed to these endocrine disruptors like atrazine that actually either inhibit boys' production of testosterone, xenoestrogens or fake estrogens in women's bodies, and they can cause them to produce toxic forms of estrogen, which puts them at higher risk for cancer and infertility too. So the state of Louisiana has from what I understand, no organic sugar cane, none. Next door, Florida has 25,000 acres. Now, who do you think is doing better economically? Yeah, of course, because it's a higher priced commodity, but think of the utility. If we can get the farms along the parish to switch over to organic methods, think of how much healthier the water will be there that the folks are drinking. And think about not only will the water be healthier, but the whole environment will be healthier. There will be a new industry for Louisiana. There will be more profits in it. And, that atrazine is also manufactured at plants along the river, upriver, too. So it really not only reduces demand, it would reduce demand, which is good actually, but it would just save so much money on healthcare. Atrazine is a very dangerous chemical. It's also, by the way, found in the Midwest. Wherever corn is grown, you'll find it in the surface waters of the Midwest. And, it's throughout rural communities. You really have to be aware of exposure to atrazine. It's kind of like a poster child for all the endocrine disruptors, though, because a lot of the ones we've talked about today, like DDT, for example, PCBs, those are endocrine disruptors too. So is phthalates. So, these kids, I mentioned these kids at the 5th Ward School in Louisiana, their drinking water has atrazine. So they get chloroprene in their air and atrazine in their drinking water. So we're also trying to supply the school with water filters. We're working on that next.
Wow. I bet most of the residents in Louisiana don't even realize this, or even residents in the Midwest. I have family who lives in the Midwest, and I bet if I asked them, hey, did you know that atrazine's in most of your water? They probably wouldn't even know.
It's really scary because these folks, what happens, Carolyn, is someone who's in his late 60s gets liver cancer or another form of cancer, when really that person should be healthy into his or her 80s or 90s. We have that potential. It's a robber, and it's robbing our kids of fertility, and they don't know it. And, your show is so important. Your social media are so important because you really inform people about this stuff. And, it's something where, again, it should be zero tolerance. We don't need these herbicides like atrazine to feed America. And the way to move the country along is as we're getting back to, is for our enforcement agencies and our Congress to use a little more of a stick there. Zero tolerance is the answer, and force these companies and farmers to think more about sustainable methods. And in the case of Louisiana, it's 1.3 million Louisianans who are getting atrazine in their drinking water, because the cane fields are upriver from New Orleans. So it's even crazier because these same chemicals are causing global warming. So we're kind of eating the foods and chemicals that are causing our own demise. So there is sanity here, even though we're getting a little nihilistic.
Well, okay. So for these listeners that may live in Louisiana or the Midwest, I try to teach on my page that our tap water is not what it used to be years ago. We've got way more pesticides in them, like you said, and endocrine disruptors in our water. And I mean, the list goes on of what's in our water. And so do you just recommend that everybody use a filter when drinking water?
Yes. And that's one of the big things that I talk about in the new book, Raising Healthy Kids. If you can afford it, if you can afford the $300 or so, get a reverse osmosis system that fits underneath your sink, because that will filter out both the atrazines and the forever chemicals. But being an activist, as I am, I understand what it's like to live on a budget, or in some cases, no budget. So there are alternatives for even folks like myself and others who really have to watch they're spending, and I count most of us there. So, but if you can afford it, to spend the $300, because you know what, you'll save so much on not having to buy bottled water anymore. Trust the technology here; it works. But if you can't afford the $300 right away, spend $25 or $30 online and get yourself a faucet filter, because that will still remove about 85 to 90% of many of the organochlorines, lead, pesticides, and other contaminants. Then, if you can afford another $25 or $30, get yourself a zero water pitcher filter, because those will filter out the forever chemicals. And what I recommend is, if you're on a budget, get that faucet filter and put the water through the faucet filter right into the zero water pitcher filter, double filter it. In the end, you've spent $50, Carolyn. Do you know how much you'll save on bottled water and all the headaches of lugging it up and all those bottles that really never do get recycled? It's just such a much better approach, in my opinion.
It is. Okay, so you talked about some of these pesticides being endocrine disruptors. And so a lot of my listeners know about endocrine disruptors and them especially being in beauty products. So I'm glad we touched upon them being in pesticides and our water as well. But I'm curious, did you sue Johnson & Johnson over phthalates?
The nonprofit group for which I'm chief officer did sue them.
And was it because they had phthalates, or was it other toxic chemicals?
The suit was over phthalates, yes.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Looking for a fragrance that's as kind to your hormones as it is to the planet? Dive into the world of Dime Beauty. I love that Dime Beauty is all about transparency and quality, offering EWG-verified perfumes free of endocrine-disrupting chemicals. Say goodbye to parabens, sulfates, and phthalates, and hello to a scent you can feel great about. Dime's Beauty collection is vegan, cruelty-free, and features 9 irresistible perfume scents and 2 sophisticated colognes. My personal favorite is 7 Summers. Each fragrance is crafted with natural ingredients such as organic sugarcane alcohol and botanical extracts. Use code JUSTINGREDIENTS for 20% off your purchase. Visit dimebeautyco.com and again use code JUSTINGREDIENTS. Now back to the show. Why don't you tell my listeners what phthalates are and what the issue is with them?
Phthalates are microplastics, and they're used in so many different cosmetic products, Carolyn, because they're used to fix in the fragrances. They also kind of add a little bit of texture to the solutions, and they are endocrine disruptors. They're everywhere because they're so commonly used. Besides in cosmetics, they're used in any kind of pliable material, like they'll be found in backpacks, rubber, toys, steering wheel covers, all just because of their texturizing. They're microplastics. They block male testosterone. They mimic female testosterone. They're associated with, in boys and girls, modified gender behavior, because they take away the sex hormones from developing properly when kids are in the womb. Say mom is using cosmetics, a heavy fragrance user during her pregnancy. It's really a high exposure. It's a dangerous exposure. And the kids will lose cognitive power. They'll lose 5 or 6 IQ points. Their boys will be born with increased risk for testicular cancer or undescended testicle. Girls will be at risk for higher breast cancer rates and infertility in both sexes. ADHD rates will increase. They're an all-around really bad chemical that aren't revealed in consumer products, and that's why we've been testing so many consumer products and finding them and taking legal action. All our legal actions are meant to provide a public benefit, and that's what's really important. So when you see products that say no phthalates, watch the wording. You know what they say? They'll say something like this: made without phthalates. You know why they're doing that?
Why is that?
If you say free of phthalates, you're implying that you've actually tested the product.
Oh.
And I'm telling you, I know from experience, from so many companies we've looked at, They don't test.
Interesting.
They tell their suppliers some phthalates they don't want, some they don't enlist. They have high detection limits. So they don't say free of phthalates. They say made without phthalates. That's not a true statement because a number of these companies do have phthalates. The problem here is some companies really don't have them, but that say made without phthalates, but some that say made without phthalates do have them. And they're using a term of art that's meant to trick the consumer, and it's not fair to us. And this is where my group is really, the Healthy Living Foundation Chemical Toxin Working Group. This is an area that we're actively pursuing because it's really, another bad one, Carolyn, is plant-based. Do you know how many shampoos say they're plant-based? This is
and
so
they have one little
too.
tiny part of a plant in there.
Yeah, and what they're using is ethylene oxide to make these ethoxylated alcohols. So they turn the plant, like say they get sodium lauryl sulfate from coconut harvest. But they turn it into sodium lauryl sulfate by using a very toxic petrochemical called ethylene oxide, which forms dioxane in the products and contaminates community air with ethylene oxide. That's another misleading term. But made free of phthalates is one thing which I wouldn't trust any longer. Made without phthalates, sadly, I wish I could trust it as a consumer because those are the products I want. But honestly, after all the testing we've done, I'd say it's maybe a 50-50 chance.
Well, this doesn't sound very hopeful for the consumer because phthalates don't have to be listed on the ingredient label. So if it doesn't have to be listed on the ingredient label and you can't trust phthalate-free or no phthalates, how do you know if something doesn't have phthalates in it then?
Your best bet is to buy organic cosmetics. And I say that because it reduces your overall exposure and gives you the best chance of avoiding phthalates. But it's not perfect either. It's just a big marker for reducing your overall exposure. There are some things as a consumer you can do to reduce your exposure. Avoid products that list fragrance. Fragrance or parfum, P-A-R-F-U-M, are both indicators for phthalate contamination. Avoid all the marker chemicals. If a product says it's plant-based, but has any of these ETH ingredients like sodium lauryl sulfate or sodium myric sulfate, avoid them. They will probably have other toxic ingredients. There's no way to avoid your total exposure, but there are certainly ways to markedly reduce your exposure to phthalates in cosmetics. Also, perfumes. Every perfume that I've tested that my kids brought home as teenagers, like English Leather and Canoe and other cheap brands you can buy at the, regular department stores and stuff, had dibutyl N phthalate, I think it's called, and other phthalates. So again, Mom, if you're using, and Dad too, let me tell you, this is a male-female production here with your kids. Stop using these perfumes. There are companies that sell phthalate that claim they are phthalate-free perfumes, and we're going to start testing them as a group. What I say right now as a consumer, because I don't have a great answer, is I'll probably buy some of these phthalate-free products and use them and test them, and then we'll report on them.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, we need to know that because this is a huge issue. Carolyn, you get, well, why isn't government banning them? Government doesn't ban. What it does is just sets up the amount that industry needs, the level industry needs to continue marketing its products with them. They'll say, okay, you can have like X number of 1,000 parts per million or billion phthalates in your backpack, but we won't ban it. We'll just limit it. But again, we know from the studies that high normal levels, that is just high levels of normal exposure, which are millions upon millions of kids, are harming them right now. So, the adults in the room are you and me who are talking about this. This is a new world. This is like a millennial and beyond world now. Boomers are aware of it, but kids have to live it. And we need this in the schools. We need to be teaching this stuff in the schools. That What are phthalates? That's a question a school kid needs to ask, because they're going to lose their fertility. Kids are losing their fertility. Their gender behaviors are changing. Some of it is the natural variations, but we're also throwing in those wild cards.
Yeah, we need to educate the kids. Parents need to be educated. Educating others is what's going to help the best, because like you said, this is, their generation's issues. My parents didn't have to deal with a lot of these issues, when they were raising me as a child. So it is their issues, and we need to help them by educating them, and people need to vote with their dollars. And I feel like we need to vote in politics for those that are willing to make changes and action. Will take action on some of these health concerns and chemical concerns, because some don't care.
Well, no kidding. In Louisiana, for example, the Democratic governor, John Bel Edwards, is trying. It's Landry now who's governor, but there was a Democrat before Landry, and he brought in the biggest plastics plant in the world called Formosa to Cancer Alley. Like, we need more polyester suits, synthetic turf, and polyethylene bags. We need another plant poisoning people in Cancer Alley, don't we? No, we don't. When they brought the plant into, the plant's not built yet, because there are people there called Rice St. James, St. John the Baptist, concerned citizens of St. John the Baptist, who are working on these issues like day and night. But when the governor brought in the plant, the press held the press conference to announce the plant in 2018. All the politicians there were Democrats. Louisiana is a little bit different. We need to educate. First of all, that's a whole other world. But if you're speaking generally about politicians and Democrats who should be for this, we need to educate both sides, Republicans and Democrats, on this issue and what effective legislation is, because frankly, a lot of Republicans, constituents, take my side on this. We may differ on other issues, but when it comes to kids and toxic exposures, there's a lot of nihilism there that's aimed at the government. But I would think a lot of Republicans, and I know this, should aim their nihilism also at some of these corporations poisoning our kids. That's why RFK is so popular on that side. I think it's something that we need to educate both sides about, because, if you don't have zero tolerance and regulation by category, it's going to be like a big kabuki dance, and we'll end up in the same place where we started.
Yeah. I wish it was not a Republican versus Democrat issue, because to me, it's not. It's our health.
Yeah.
And our health doesn't care.
Yeah.
Our health doesn't care what political party you are. These toxins are going to affect everybody. Well, I want to go back to phthalates, because I had one other question for you about phthalates. You explained it well, and I think people know what they are. But I remember you sharing a story about hairstylists and possibly all the endocrine disruptors that they're dealing with impacting infertility. Is that true?
That's right. During interviews I conducted for Raising Healthy Kids, I interviewed hairstylists from New York City. And during the pandemic, there was actually a baby boom among hairdressers. And the reason I deduced, and this was what was told to me too, is that because they had lost their customer bases in the salons, their exposure to toxic chemicals like the quaternium compounds, phthalates, and other endocrine disruptors was so much reduced, they were finally able to conceive and carry their pregnancies to birth. Before then, there's so many hairdressers were suffering miscarriages or inability to get pregnant. And it was because of all these toxic exposures. So it's just, again, you can really do this, mom, dad, whoever's listening, all adults, you can take control of your life and be the adult and protect yourself. But what we're trying to do here is show you something that you might not know about. But the fertility rates really increase. So if you're having difficulty conceiving in your own life, look at the cosmetics that you're using. Then look at the foods that you're eating. Switch to an organic diet. Try to make all those cosmetics organic, certified organic ingredients. Same for your cleaning products. And like we said, buy the ticket. Then you'll take the trip. And once you get there, you'll find out, oh, hey, actually, I like this way better.
So this book that you're talking about, the Raising Healthy Kids, do you give tips on how to create a toxic-free home?
Yeah. Raising Healthy Kids is a 360-degree view. It's really for any adult, actually. And the good thing about raising healthy kids is that means you're raising a healthy parent, because it's nature, nurture, back and forth. But yeah, and for healthy homes, there's so much you can do. Dust is a big enemy. People don't know about it. You're not just dusting to be clean, but dust is sort of like the Trojan horse of chemical exposures, because it contains all the remnants and residues of those forever chemicals from our electronics or what we track in on the soles of our shoes. And then we end up inhaling it. And if you have children, they inhale it, they taste it, they're low to the ground. So, one big tip is take your shoes off before you come in, dust, and get a high-efficiency particulate air filter for your home if necessary, because you really do have a lot of exposure just from what accumulates in your home. But there's so many other things to do. The cleaning products, your bedding, and the options today when we're shopping are great. We get back, Carolyn, to we adults who were buying the healthier stuff, 10 years ago, they created those markets. And now if you want to buy organic bedding for your kids, organic sheets, they don't cost an arm and a leg. They may cost an arm, but, they don't cost that leg anymore.
That's funny. Yeah, we're getting more and more choices on the market, which is great, which just shows voting with your dollars really does work. And so if people are listening to this and they're a little overwhelmed because we've talked about all of these dangerous pesticides and phthalates, are there just some simple tips of advice that you would give someone to make it not so overwhelming?
Oh, yeah. One, you don't have to throw everything out at once. Two, take a deep breath. The good news is the body responds immediately to the changes. As an example, when you munch on an organic carrot, for example, feel what your body feels. There's health there. It's so quick. Our messenger RNA picks up all these signals from the outside. And when it's a healthy environment, it tells the DNA we're a little healthier now. All those cancer biomarkers that were forming from your toxic exposures recede. It's like the tide goes back out. It's calm again. So just take a deep breath. Your next step is going to be the best one, because you're going to get that ticket and you're going to enter a much, much better promised land. You can start with organics. The good news is most of the staples we buy today are the same price as conventionally sourced. So just do it. Get your apples, your celery, your lettuce, your potatoes, your onions, tomatoes, your bread. It's not going to be more expensive than the organics. Unless you're buying white bread that's, like 99 cents made out of cellulose. It's the same price now. So go organic. Same thing for your cosmetics and your cleaning products. They're not much more expensive. And what I tried to do in Raising Healthy Kids, my fourth tip is give you a 360-degree view and turn anyone, I call it turning you into a black belt in the world of chemical toxins. But there are big principles. Some of those are what I just relayed. Turn you into a black belt in the world of chemical toxins so that any situation you can handle. Because there are these big principles, like, again, if you're out dining, you take the principle of fatty foods have the most pesticides, those DDTs and PCBs. So, you can get chicken instead of beef. If your kids are at a fast food place, they can get chicken fillets instead of beef burgers. And they'll avoid the hormones in the beef. Chickens won't have those hormones. Poultry isn't raised that way. So there are lots of things to learn from Raising Healthy Kids. It'll make you a black belt. And we're all learning. That's the big tip. I like cold brew coffee. I like drinking it. And for a while, Carolyn, I was buying it in plastic bottles, ready-made. And then I learned from being on the internet, I can make my own cold brew. It's really simple. I don't have to buy all that plastic anymore. I just posted on Instagram about it. Tastes better. It's so much cheaper, and it's all organic, and there's no more plastic. So there's so many, and I learned it, so every day we're learning things. So yeah, be open to learning things and be open to those really positive changes that come as you do make them one by one step by one step.
Yeah, I love that advice so much. So if people are interested in getting this book, where can they find it?
Oh, buy it from your local independent bookseller or go to Amazon and put in Raising Healthy Kids, David Steinman.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about this book. Will you tell my listeners where they can find you if they're wanting to learn more from you?
Sure, davidwilliamsteinman.com or raisinghealthykidsthebook.com.
Perfect. But like you said, you're on Instagram.
David Steinman _author, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, by David Steinman.
Perfect. Well, they can go learn so much from you and how to hopefully raise their kids in a healthy environment when, there's just so many toxins around us, but they can make powerful choices that can affect their kids' health and their own health. I always end my podcast by asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
Oh my gosh, that is so original. The best ingredient. I'll tell you what comes to mind.
Okay.
Chocolate. Traveling in Mexico, in the area where all those big Mayan pyramids are, stopping at a little Mexican place and getting a cacao drink. It was warm. It was invigorating. The scent was great. There's a little bit of theobromine in there, the nectar of the gods. So it elevates you a little bit.
Well, and cacao is full of antioxidants and can be really healthy. It's just we mess it up in our candy bars when we add all the artificial ingredients and all the huge amounts of sugar.
Yeah. So when you ask me for my favorite ingredient, I'll be specific. Cacao.
I love that.
Left unprocessed and just the way it's meant to be.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for all you're doing out there to help educate parents and your nonprofit organization that you do and all those things. You are making a difference. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Carol Ann. It's been a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.